Good evening, I'm Mama Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International. On tonight's headlines, the U.S. has carried out a second strike in 2 weeks on Iran-linked facilities in retaliation for continuing attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said in a statement that the strike was conducted at the direction of President Biden, targeting a weapons storage facility in eastern Syria used by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and affiliated groups. China is defending its Coast Guard's actions against Philippine ships at a contested South China Sea outpost. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin says that the Coast Guard took necessary measures to protect Chinese sovereignty and maritime interests. The world is facing a moment of danger, that is according to Singapore's Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan. In a Bloomberg forum, Balakrishnan said that global conflicts and escalating tensions are sowing divisions and that he sees unsettling parallels to the world state before the outbreak of the First World War. And later, a team of surgeons in New York has performed the world's first transplant of an entire eye. The groundbreaking procedure was performed at Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx, and it involved replacing a patient's entire eye with that of a deceased donor. The Pentagon says it doesn't believe its airstrike on an Iran-linked weapons storage site in Syria resulted in any casualties. The strike took place on Wednesday in Syria's Deir ez-Zor province. U.S. officials said it was in response to a growing number of attacks on U.S. troops in the region.
What you're seeing is we are very candid about we're seeing an uptick in attacks, but so far we have not seen any significant casualties. And you saw that on October 26th, when we did hit key infrastructure nodes that these IRGC-backed groups use. So it's really not necessarily of an comparison every time there's an attack. It's how successful we can be about damaging and destroying infrastructure that they have used to. And that's exactly what we did on October 26th.
Mr. President, why did you strike Iran's Revolutionary Guard?
Because they struck us.
And President Biden,
why did you hit them again?
All of this occurs during Hamas's negotiations for the release of hostages. High-level talks are being conducted by U.S. and Israeli officials to free more of the 239 hostages, including Americans in Gaza. CIA Director Bill Burns participated in a meeting in Doha with the Prime Minister of Qatar and the head of Israel's Mossad. Additionally, in order to allow more citizens to flee, the White House affirms that Israel agreed to expand the 4-day pauses in northern Gaza today. A question was asked of President Biden regarding more from Israel.
Did you ask for a 3-day pause to Netanyahu?
You know, I've been asking for a pause for a lot more than 3 days. Yes.
Did you ask him to pause for 3 days to get the hostages out for that
Yes.
length of time?
I've asked for even a longer pause for some of them.
Mr. President, are you frustrated with Prime Minister Netanyahu that he has not listened more to some of the things you have asked him to do?
It's taking a little longer than I hoped.
An apparent coerced propaganda video showing 13-year-old Yagil Yaakov and 77-year-old Yana Katzer, who were both abducted from kibbutz near Oz on October 7, PIJ on Thursday night. Now, in this video, the two speak Hebrew, complimenting their captors' apparent humanity and accusing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of starting the current crisis. Hamas, or PIJ, declared that provided the appropriate measures are met, it was ready to release the two for humanitarian and medical reasons. IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari said that it was significant to see a sign of life from the two captives, but slammed the video as a psychological terror. According to a senior official at the Economic and Social Commission for West Asia, The number of children killed in Gaza in less than 4 weeks has exceeded the total number of children lost to armed conflict in 22 countries in any 1 year since 2020. As of November 9, Rola Dashtin, Executive Secretary of ESCWA, briefed journalists on the anticipated socio-economic effects of the conflict on Palestine.
In just over 4 weeks, the number of children killed in Gaza, which is about 4,300 people, has surpassed the total number of children lost to armed conflict in 22 countries any year since 2020. As of November 3rd of November, it is estimated that 35,000 housing units have been totally demolished and about 212,000 units are partially damaged. And if this war persists, the majority of Gazans' population might find themselves with nowhere to go, to call home, or to stay. A horrifying 96% of the Gazan population now faces unprecedented deprivation of all essential services and has fallen into multidimensional poverty. The negative spillover of the war is already reaching neighboring countries such as Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, compounding their socioeconomic and fiscal challenges.
Not just Gaza, for the Palestinian economy, to lose 4% of GDP in 1 month, that's not comparable to any conflict we have seen before. The Syrian economy used to lose 1% of GDP per month. After 2 months of fighting, Palestine, and not just Gaza, would have lost 16 years of human development. Health and education and infrastructure and economic growth, that would be wiped out. Palestine would go back to 2005.
وفي الطريق من هول ما رأيت الشهداء على الطرقات مرمية أجسادهم والدبابات حولهم وحولنا، دبابات الاحتلال حولهم وحولنا، احتراق السيارات، احتراق، تهديم المنازل، تهديم المصانع، تهديم أي شيء بوجههم.
We know that the civil situation in the Gaza Strip is not an easy one. We know that there are a lot of challenges. We know that there are a lot of difficulties. But I can say that there is no humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. We are in war. We didn't pick up this war. Hamas chose to open this war.
Israel's embassy in the U.S. chastised Israel for demolishing a Palestinian house in Jerusalem on Friday, a rare public reprimand to the State Department division handling Palestinian relations. The U.S. Office of Palestinian Affairs stated on X, formerly known as Twitter, that the government of Israel has demolished the home of a Palestinian family in response to the actions of their 13-year-old child. An entire family should not lose their home because of the actions of one individual, it stated. Now responding immediately, the Israeli embassy stated, "Context is helpful. The 13-year-old is a terrorist who murdered an Israeli citizen by stabbing him to death." The adolescent was not named by any side, but he was recognized by Israeli media as Mohammed Zalbani, who they claimed had fatally stabbed an Israeli border policeman in February when he was examining a bus in East Jerusalem. The Times of Israel said the home demolition took place on Wednesday in the Shuafat refugee camp in East Jerusalem under the protection of a large police force. Since the start of the Israeli-Hamas war, 98 Filipinos have now been able to leave the Gaza Strip without incident. That is according to a statement made on Saturday by the Philippine Embassy in Egypt. And this came after on November 10, a third group of 14 Filipinos managed to breach the Rafah border and enter Egypt. The 14 were received by the Philippine Embassy staff, headed by Vice Consul Boher Kapati, and were escorted by their Palestinian relatives, according to Ambassador Ezzedine Tago. In other news, China is defending its Coast Guard's actions against Philippine ships at a contested South China Sea outpost. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said that the Coast Guard took necessary measures to protect Chinese sovereignty and maritime interests. Let's listen in.
On November 10th, 5 vessels from the Philippine side intruded into Nansha Qingdao and the adjacent waters, severely undermining China's sovereignty. And we have taken measures necessary to have law enforcement of law. And we have lodged serious representation to relevant departments. And Renaijiao is a part of China's Nansha Qingdao. And the Philippines' action is a serious infringement of international law, and the DOC. China firmly opposes that. China urges the Philippines to stop immediately the provocations on the sea and take away the grounded vessel. And China will continue to take measures necessary based on law to maintain, to safeguard our territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests.
Meanwhile, the embassies of Australia and the U.S. in Manila are calling out China's dangerous actions in the West Philippine Sea, including the use of its Coast Guard's water cannon on the Philippine vessel heading to resupply Filipino troops stationed at the BRP Sierra Madre in Ayungin Shoal on November 10. Australian Ambassador to the Philippines, HKU, and U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines, Mary Kay Carlson, both condemned the incident and reiterated their support for the Philippines and a free and open Indo-Pacific. The envoys of Japan, the United Kingdom, the European Union, the Netherlands, and Germany also echoed opposition to actions that increase tensions and undermine peace in the area. The Philippines has protested the latest incident, bringing the number of diplomatic protests filed against China since the start of the Marcos administration to 125. This incident took place near Second Thomas Shoal, which is about 200 kilometers from the western Philippine island of Palawan and more than 1,000 kilometers from China's nearest major landmass, the Hainan Island. A handful of Filipino troops are stationed in the BRP Sierra Madre, which the Philippine Navy grounded on the reef in 1999 to check China's advance in the waters. Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong has downplayed the likelihood of an imminent conflict over Taiwan. In a speech at the Bloomberg New Economy Forum in Singapore, Lee said that China is not trigger-happy about taking over Taiwan and that the world is not going to wake up one day and find that they've decided to launch D-Day.
I don't think the Chinese would ever have thought lightly about going into Taiwan. They must surely know, and they have soldiers and sailors and airmen who will advise them that an amphibious attack.
He also said that attacking Taiwan would be much more difficult than the U.S. invasion of Iwo Jima during World War II.
Attacking Taiwan is not like doing Iwo Jima, and Iwo Jima was bloody enough. So I'm sure they must make their calculations, but I don't believe that they are trigger happy. They have a problem. They would like Taiwan to be part of one China, but how to get from here to there? And I believe if they are not provoked, if events don't spin out of control, I don't believe that you're going to wake up one day and find that they've decided to launch D-Day.
Southeast Asian nations have expressed growing concern over the prospect of a conflict between the U.S. and China. They fear that such a conflict could disrupt critical supply chains and destabilize the region. Leaders in the region have urged both sides to exercise restraint and avoid actions that could escalate tensions.
That's another possible flashpoint because four ASEAN countries have claims in the South China Sea which overlap with Chinese claims. Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia, Vietnam. All of them want to work some arrangement out between themselves in the first place and with China mostest, because China is really the biggest claimant and most muscular. But at the same time, all of them have got other stakes with China. They are trading with China. China is their biggest trading partner, I think, for all of them. And therefore, this is not the South China Sea is important, but it is not the only thing at stake. And I do not believe that any of them really, truly want to push it over the brink.
But nobody ever does on the whole. Putin
nobody ever does on the whole, but I would say that in the case of the Southeast Asian countries, their awareness of what the Soviets used to call the correlation of forces.
Yes.
In other words, who's on your side and who is on my side and whose battalions are bigger. I think there's a very healthy sense of realism, and therefore some restraints will be there. And even the Filipinos, I mean, the Americans are their treaty ally, but are you sure you want to get into a fight where you will be the battleground?
Lee's comments come ahead of an expected meeting between President Xi Jinping and Joe Biden next week in California. Mr. Lee said that the talks are a positive development, but that they will not resolve all of the challenges in the relationship between the world's two biggest economies.
They met last year in Bali. It was a good meeting. They agreed on some principles that they would respect each other, they would cooperate, it would be win-win. But after that, in 12 months, in fact less than that, events happened and things went off track. And they're trying to put it back on track again, and I think there's a lot of toing and froing to tee it up so that the meeting can take place and be productive. But I think that this is a very deep contradiction between the two countries, and you need a meeting to head in the right direction, but you do not expect a meeting to make everything sweetness and light again. It's not possible.
North Korea is slamming U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's comments on Pyongyang's relations with Moscow. In a statement on Saturday, North Korea's foreign ministry said Blinken's comments were irresponsible and provocative and would only escalate the dangerous political and military tension on the Korean peninsula.
We share profound concerns about the DPRK's growing and dangerous military cooperation with Russia. The United States appreciates the clear message that President Yoon delivered at the UN General Assembly about the risks of that collaboration. Today, Minister Pak and I spoke about further actions that our countries can take with partners to intensify pressure on Moscow not to transfer military technology to the DPRK in violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions.
Mr. Blinken was in Seoul earlier this week, where he met with South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and other top officials. He also warned that Russia and North Korea are growing their military cooperation and that this is a source of concern for the U.S. and its allies. Seoul has said that Pyongyang sent 1 million artillery rounds to bolster Moscow's war in Ukraine in exchange for advice on satellite technology. North Korea has denied this, but it has acknowledged that it has friendly and cooperative relations with Moscow. The U.S. and its allies are concerned that North Korea may be seeking to develop new missile and nuclear weapons technologies from Russia. They're also concerned that North Korea may provide Russia with more military assistance. The world is facing a moment of danger, that is according to Singapore's Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan. In a Bloomberg forum, Balakrishnan said that global conflicts and escalating tensions are sowing divisions, and that he already sees unsettling parallels to the world state before the outbreak of the First World War. Take a look.
Right now, you have a hot war in Europe, Ukraine. You already have a war in Gaza. The problem is whether you're going to get a regional conflagration. And I know you put him on the spot with the question about oil price. Well, the real issue is that if you have a regional conflagration, and in particular, Iran gets into the act, I think you can easily imagine the impact of this on global oil supplies and therefore the price, and the impact on all the rest of us. There's one more sub-factor which is worth remembering. The difference between 1973 and 2023 is that the United States is now an energy exporter, net, which is very different from the situation in 1973. And you need to pass the implications of that. Now, going beyond the Middle East, you will now have a world stage, hot war in Europe, war in the Middle East with possible conflagration, And you've got tripwires in the Pacific, Taiwan and South China Sea. And if you tot up on a ledger the countries aligned on either side of these conflicts or tripwires all around the world, I'm very uncomfortable that it's the same cast of characters on either side of those lines. And therefore, you know, I don't want to be excessively alarmist, but the last time that happened globally was the First World War. So this is a moment of danger. I wouldn't say it's highly likely. It's less likely, but the probability is not zero, and it's got profound implications on peace and prosperity.
Meanwhile, in the same forum, according to John Waldron, President and Chief Operating Officer of Goldman Sachs Group, Inc., the single largest threat to the forecast for the world economy is still inflation.
I would say inflation. I would say inflation is still, to me, the single biggest risk, certainly to economic growth, to purchasing power, to the deployment of capital. And then if you think about how perverse inflation is for those who are less well off, that has a very negative effect on prosperity, lifting people up out of poverty, or even those in the lower middle class that are trying to rise beyond the lower middle class. It's just very perverse for that category, which is in essence what all of us are trying to do in terms of driving economic growth to lift more people, into the system. So I think inflation is far and away the biggest concern. And I think the geopolitics that are now overlaid in a much more profound way, in many ways you could say that the peace dividend we've had for the better part of 25 or 30 years is kind of over. And we're entering, unfortunately, perhaps a new era with more geopolitical tension, more war, more challenge that I think is going to make it even more complicated to create more economic growth. I think the impact that could have on commodities, as an example, can have more perverse impact on inflation. I think that the supply chain resetting that's been going on in the world is generally inflationary. The transition from just-in-time, globalization-oriented supply chain, where you were running one global supply chain where you wanted access to your supply when you could have it. Now there's more focus on resiliency and duplication and moving supply chain to various places. That's generally, to me, an inflationary impulse. ESG and renewable energy and decarbonization, all of which we need to be investing in, generally have inflationary implications. If you think about some of the subsidy policy that's going on, whether it's the IRA in the US or other policies around the world, that generally has an impulse to drive inflation further. So there's a lot. Wages, still pretty tight labor market, that has more of an inflationary impulse. And I'd say the supply of oil, which is generally constraining, has been constrained, also has a positive implication towards inflation. So we spend a lot of time at our firm worrying about the longer run implications of inflation and how they generally will probably create a lower growth environment for us for a period of time with lower purchasing power capabilities, particularly for those that are less well off.
It's like that, everybody talks about all the problems. Maybe I'll take a slightly different take. You ask risk, the other side of risk is return. So perhaps, if you sort of wear more of that cap, Jenny talked about, treasury bond or cash yielding more. That's a positive thing for investors. In fact, I would say, look at U.S. tips, right? U.S. 10-year tips is yielding a real yield of 2.5%. We haven't seen that for a long time. It was negative. That means you actually get inflation-protected return guaranteed, right? Because I believe the U.S. government is rock solid. For 10 years, you clip 2.5% above inflation. That's very attractive, I would say. And that's actually great competition for a lot of other asset classes, right? If you were to take additional risk, you have to expect a return higher than that level of 2.5 real. So the second is even in fragmentation, right? We talk about fragmentation, geopolitics. You could see opportunities. There you see it in some of the beneficiaries of this supply chain reconfiguration. I think this region is a big winner. India, Mexico. So there are spots or industry where you can benefit from the reconfiguration. Maybe third, even in problems, right? We talk about climate change, big problem, very daunting. You can see opportunity in, say, energy transition. We need, I mean, according to IEA, we need something like 4.3 trillion a year to sort of have energy transition done with enough capital. Estimate last year 1.8 trillion. So 1.8, 4.3 is a big gap. So I think actually for investors, that's an opportunity as well, right? That there are more and more projects, more and more companies going through transition that you can deploy large amount of capital.
In tonight's other news, the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology said there is no need to raise the volcano's alert level status to 2, despite the highest recorded sulfur dioxide emissions from the volcano this year.
Kahapon po nakapagtala po kami ng 11,499 tons per day of sulfur dioxide emission. And tama po kayo, this is the highest volume that we recorded so far this year. But this is not the highest volume that we recorded since Taal Volcano erupted in 2020. Ang pinakamataas po ay 25,000 tons per day na nangyari po ito noong October 5, 2021. Again, hindi po ito indikasyon na kailangan na natin itaas yung alert level from 1 to alert level 2. May iba pa tayong mga parameters na tinitingnan before we raise it to alert level 2. One of this is the increase in seismicity, and nakikita nga po natin kahapon, 5 a.m. kahapon to 5 a.m. kanina, 4 na volcanic earthquakes lamang. Another is if the volcano is inflated, among others. Pero sa ngayon po, ang nakikita natin ay long-term deflation. Although may short-term inflation tayo o pamamaga ng vulkan, sa long-term naman po, ito ay deflated. Mula 5 a.m. kahapon to 5 a.m. Kanina, nakapagtala lamang po tayo ng 4 na volcanic earthquakes. Kabaliktad po ng inflation. So inflation, namamaga yung vulkan dahil po may umaakyat na magma. Pero ang nakikita natin dito, nagde-deflate yung vulkan, hindi siya nag-inflate. Kabaliktaran ng inflation po yung nakikita natin.
A new report from the nonprofit Climate Central has revealed that the Earth has just experienced its hottest 12 months ever recorded. Researchers analyzed global average temperatures from November last year to October this year, and they found out that there were about 2.4 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial averages. Nearly 6 billion people had more than a month's worth of temperatures that were impacted by climate change, according to the report. Surgeons in New York have performed the world's first entire eye transplant, and New Delhi is waging a war against pollution. Plus, Indonesia has launched Southeast Asia's largest floating solar farm. Hachiko, the loyal dog who waited for his owner at a train station for 9 years after his death, is being remembered on his 100th birth anniversary. All these stories and more from Thomas Likeness.
And now news and commentary from around the globe. The medical breakthroughs continue. Surgeons in New York have performed the world's first transplant of an entire eye. Still not known yet whether the patient will be able to see.
Eye looks really healthy. I'm going to clean up a little bit of these sleepies.
The patient is Aaron James. He's a 46-year-old line worker from Arkansas. He had survived a 7,200-volt electric shock a couple of years ago. Doctors did the transplant last May, but just announced it this past week. They say the eye appears to be healthy, but it still isn't communicating with the brain, allowing James to see out of it.
I think what we're all seeing right now, especially the experts that I work with at my institution at NYU Langone, is the position that we're in today none of us expected to be at. And therefore, we're becoming quite creative on how to kind of make the result or the effect or the ultimate potential of seeing, how can we make that even better? How could we, for some lack of a better word, how could we rehab the eye? And we're all coming together and thinking about mechanisms to potentially improve the quality of the result that we're seeing. We didn't expect to be where we are today. And therefore, it caught us all by surprise. that the retina is well vascularized, that on retinography, the layers of the retina that we would think would be non-existent are existent. And now we're just kind of creating new algorithms and methods of evaluation to test the potential hypothesis that he could see. And if there is a potential for sight, how could we try to train the eye? How could we try to train the brain to receive those messaging? So it's a whole new field for us. It's uncharted territory, but we're looking forward to the exploration.
A team of doctors spent 21 hours in the operating room performing the whole eye transplant, as well as a partial face transplant.
The procedure is no longer an experiment. And I would go one step further to say that face transplant should not even be considered an experiment anymore. It is standard of care for individuals with severe facial disfigurement. The inclusion of the eye I would consider an experiment, but how we go about performing the operation, how we go about matching the skeleton, how we get things to fit, and the comfort that we have, the confidence to perform these procedures precisely is important. But you also have to be surrounded by a team of experts, a superb anesthesiologist that can maintain hemodynamic stability in the operating room, individuals in radiology that can give us precise measurements of vascularity of the bone, and the instruments that we can create to perform these procedures precisely has allowed us to move forward. And that's why we've been able to trim the time from where I started in 2012 from 36 hours to now 21. And we
I can smell again. I can eat again, taste food. For the first time in a year and a half, I got to kiss my wife. I mean, maybe just little stuff, but until you don't have that, I mean, I want to go out in public now, and not wear a mask and cover up. So, I mean, my confidence level has gone way up. So, I mean, it's just all around, it's just been it was a great choice. Previous face transplants, I want it to get out to as many people as you can that may not know about this option, especially now with the eye. I mean, that was one reason why I did it. Even if it didn't work for me, it was a start. So maybe, Dr. Rodriguez and his team could learn something different to do the next time.
The capital of India has set up a war room, a green war room. The air in New Delhi is among the most polluted in the world, enveloping residents in a dangerous, dense smog. This is a typical day in New Delhi. It can be painful to breathe at times. The air irritates the eyes. Sometimes it has more than 30 times the danger limits of pollutants. Here in this room, 17 experts monitor live stream pollution hotspots in the city. When a problem is spotted, teams on the ground take action. Polluting factories can be served notice. Garbage fires can be extinguished. Vehicles belching black smoke can be stopped. Water trucks can be dispatched to douse down dust from construction sites. But one thing these environmental warriors can't fight are the huge fires lit by farmers outside of the city to clear rice fields. And this is a political problem. You see, farmers have a lot of clout. They say stubble burning is cheap and easy and should not be outlawed. Besides, they say that city pollution doesn't affect them. So until there's a political will to clean up the atmosphere, New Delhi's pollution police will have to be content with controlling what they can within the city limits. Still on the environmental front, Indonesia has launched Southeast Asia's largest floating solar farm. These solar panels can generate enough electricity to power 50,000 homes. The solar farm is built on a 200-hectare reservoir in West Java. That's about 130 kilometers from the capital of Jakarta. It cost about $100 million. The floating farm has 340,000 solar panels and is part of Indonesia's plan to transition to green renewable energy. The country wants to reach net zero emissions by 2060. And it was 100 years ago that a legendary dog in Tokyo was born. The hound's name? Hachiko. You may have heard the story. Hachiko belonged to a university professor. The dog would wait at the Shibuya train station every day for his master to come home. One day in 1925, his master died unexpectedly. But for the next 10 years, Hachiko would go to the station to wait for his owner, who would never come. Hachiko died in 1935. Locals were so touched by the story that they built a statue in 1934, just before the dog's death. In World War II, the statue was melted down for the medal. It was rebuilt in 1948. It's since become a popular meeting spot for locals and tourists alike. Chicos Legend inspired a 2009 movie. It was called Hachi, A Dog's Tale. Hachiko proves that, truly, dogs deserve the title of man's best friend. I'll be back in 7 days, and until then, I wish you all peace, joy, and happiness in the ensuing week. Thomas I. Likeness, correspondent at large, Eagle News. We live in extraordinary times.
A special screening of the movie Barbie was held at the Writers Guild of America on October 25. Now, the film's director, Greta Gerwig, was in attendance and participated in a Q&A session. Here's MJ Racario, our Hollywood correspondent.
Barbie the movie, the most successful film this year. Directed by Greta Gerwig. I had a chance to catch up with her during the Q&A panel right after the special screening at Writers Guild of America in Beverly Hills. Take a look.
Oh, I didn't know exactly I didn't even really know where to begin in terms of like adapting. It's an object, so that's hard to adapt. But it felt like it felt spiky enough and strange enough, and the fact that she has been around since 1959 and everyone has an opinion of her, and she's always been kind of equal parts villain and hero. It felt like a strange enough jumping off point that there might be something there, and then when Noah and I started writing it, it was instantly like, oh, we just sort of fell in love with it, and then I got so excited, and then the kind of, from there, this idea of that it was taking place inside of a soundstage world, almost like a 1950s movie musical, it was just so apparent to me, and it's so funny because it was so, I thought it was so obvious, but I remember when I was first talking about it with everyone, they were like, oh, you're going to have to shoot in LA or Australia where there's like beaches. And I was like, oh no, this all takes place inside. And they were like, what? And I was like, yes.
You couldn't do much better than Rodrigo Prieto here, who just didn't do one movie this year. He also did Killers of the Flower Moon. You know, I know you just like pretty good. Talk about your challenges here in bringing this vision to life, and particularly in Barbie Land versus the real world here. It's definitely a different palette that you're looking for. And
yes, for sure. Well, I was actually in Oklahoma when we first talked prepping Killers of the Flower Moon, but and also with Sarah, we do these Zooms, and the presentations were incredible. I mean, Sarah already had all these images, and Greta had all these references, and so that was really the starting point. And it's amazing when I remember those days how much of that is in the movie. You know, those very first conversations, and you know, and then of course, I finished Killers of the Flower Moon, and then went to London, and then we got deep into it and saw many references, but. Indeed, I think that one thing that I think is pretty effective in film is precisely, and I find it amazing, that this world that's so fake and it's toys, right? And you feel for them, and that you really do, and that's an incredible achievement And I really enjoyed every second of witnessing that. And
That is it for entertainment news. MJ Ricardo here. Always tune into Net 25 because we live in extraordinary times.
As always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay alert, stay informed, because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.